Hey everyone, it's Russell from the Case 4. I'm here with Paul Lesko. Paul is an attorney. Hey Paul.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. Paul is an attorney for the hobby, which just sounds like an awesome confluence of your personal life and your professional life. And I want to say just a quick story about how I came to know Paul just recently. You know, the social media algorithms are the subject of a lot of good and bad
Mhm.
discussions. Oftentimes, I'm hit with ads for products. I'm like, I don't know where this ad came from. I've never used this product. Um, but apparently the Twitter algorithm knows what it's doing because it's a straight fire hose of baseball accounts. You know, you don't follow this account, but here's a tweet from this person you should follow. So a couple weeks ago, I saw a tweet. I don't remember exactly what it was, but you had tweeted something about baseball and the law, and I thought, yeah, that's a good point. Who's this guy, Paul Lesko? And looked at your bio, and it said, attorney for the hobby. And I said, well, I'm an attorney. I like baseball. He's an attorney. He likes baseball. I got to follow this guy. And I think later that day or the next day, you had posted something about representing Greg Kreinler. And I was like, I had
Mhm.
just had Greg Kreinler on the show. He's a great baseball painter. And I thought, that's
Yep.
the universe sending me a sign. I need to reach out to this guy, Paul, and have him on the show. So here we are. Paul, you've been very nice in our messages. And I want to thank you for your time for sitting here and talking with me today.
No, thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'll just ask you a little bit about you. I don't want to, you don't have to give us your whole life story, but I was looking at your bio a little bit. Looks like you went to law school in Tulane, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I've actually where my trajectory was headed was since I have a background in science. I actually went to the University of Illinois, and I have degrees in biology and biochemistry. I was
Great,
actually targeting for law school to become a patent attorney.
great.
And Graduated, went to Tulane, got out of there, started working for a large defense firm in St. Louis. And I absolutely hated getting patents for people. It was not as, you think you're on the cutting edge,
Sure.
you're going to find out about all these new technologies, which is a little bit of it. But then a lot of what you're doing is, every company has their main product, you know, they have Oreos and everything else. And you're finding a lot of patent applications on better Oreos. I didn't file anything for Oreos, but it's really what you're doing. We had some cat litter applications. You keep filing on better cat litter and everything else. So
Yeah.
it's, you're not like, filing patents on, quantum teleportation and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
pretty quickly, luckily the firm I was at had a lot of needs. Intellectual property litigation was booming in the early 2000s. So I was able quite easily to make the switch over to IP litigation, starting with patent litigation. And then if you start doing patent litigation, you get copyrights, you get trademarks, you get it all.
Yeah.
Um, After a few years, I left the defense firm and I went to a plaintiff's firm to start an IP litigation practice there. And that's kind of where I started to get into trading cards because I'm not sure if you've ever worked at a large defense firm or if you do work for a large defense firm, they are not very open minded about what you do. You have to toe the corporate line. You can't do too many things without approvals. And
I'll plead the fifth. I'm currently employed by a large national insurance defense firm and was employed by one for 5 years prior to that. So um,
nice.
I, it is what it is. It's a good way to make a living. But nobody grows up as a kid saying, I want to be an insurance defense attorney and reading it. But it's a good career. I enjoy the anyway. Enough about
No,
me.
it totally is, but it's like, if you or if you're at a large defense firm and you say, "Hey, I want to start like writing articles about trading cards,"
Yeah,
probably not going to happen. If it is, you got like three layers of approvals to get and everything else.
yeah. I've
But
always had the approach I always had was you can do whatever you want as long as you bill an insane, as long as you
yeah,
bill your time,
that's
get your
true.
work done. You can do whatever you want in what little free time you have. So,
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that because that actually is where it beat home to me the whole ask for forgiveness later.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, you just
exactly.
do what you want, but ask for forgiveness later if you have to.
Yeah.
But at the plaintiff's firm where I was, again, we are doing intellectual property litigation, and I was recently getting back into trading cards. I was having kids, and I wanted to buy something for the kids to, recognize, or commemorate their birthdays.
Sure,
So,
sure.
when my kids was born in 2006, another was born in 2008. So I wanted to get them like a complete Tops flagship, set, of all the cards for their birthday. And I'd been out of collecting for a little bit. I initially started collecting in '86, but
Sure.
then high school, college, law school pretty much sucked up all my time, and I didn't really have time to do that. So when I started to get these cards for my kids, I saw that the entire hobby changed. I mean, when I was collecting in '86, there weren't autograph cards. There were not
Uh,
memorabilia cards. I mean, it was a completely different hobby. So I saw what was there, and I saw that the quality of cards had drastically improved. So I was hooked and got back in. And I do hate to say to my kids, I actually opened up the shit that I bought for them, and that they might not be something for you in this line, but
yeah,
that's okay. But when I was getting into it, I like most attorneys, you try to keep current. You listen to
sure.
CLEs, you watch all the lawsuits that are going on, and I saw that there was a lawsuit between Tops and Upper Deck,
Okay.
where Tops accused Upper Deck of stealing their 1975 basically design for their cards and coming out with
Wow.
some inserts. And I'm
Interesting.
like, hey, wait a second here. That's a lawsuit. It involves trading cards. It involves intellectual property. My firm likes this thing called client development. How would I write an article about this lawsuit? And
Okay.
there, at a plaintiff's firm, you get a lot more leeway. You can do basically whatever you want, so long as
Sure.
get your minimums in.
Yeah.
So I wrote an article about that lawsuit and how I thought it was, what I thought was interesting about it, why I liked it. And having done a lot of copyright litigation, I kind of put it through how I would have done the lawsuit with a side by side comparison and everything else. And that article kind of took off a little bit, and I was reached the Cardboard Connection website reached out to me and said, "Hey, we like this. It's a different look at the industry than other people have done. Do you want to start writing for us?"
Oh, cool.
And I'm like, "Sure, let's do that."
Yeah.
And so what started as fun and as a just a little client development kind of thing really became now kind of the focus of my career. Is there's a lot of litigation in this area.
Really?
So I do get to cover quite a bit of it. And also, there's a lot of need out there in the sports memorabilia area, especially. This would be a shock to everybody, but there's a lot of fraud out there. And you know,
Yeah.
there's a reason you have all these authentication companies that try to authenticate everything because there's a lot of people trying to steal your money. So it's I've been out with Lesko Law LLC since I think November of last year.
Great.
I still do all plaintiffs work. We do all types of plaintiffs cases here, but we do have a heavy focus on sports memorabilia, trading cards, intellectual property, and it's been fun so far.
Yeah, yeah. I saw you were involved kind of before this with Dicamba and Roundup and some of the toxic tort litigation. That's always that's there's always going to be litigation over that
Yeah.
stuff. So,
No,
but
and
it's
just so for everyone listening, we've got two lawyers talking here, so
okay.
we have our own little short way of talking. So the dicamba case is it was a case against a small company called Monsanto, or
Okay.
Bayer now, that you may know, and it has to do with one of their products that was out there, and it became a pretty big piece of litigation. But yes, when I was at the plaintiff's firm, the litigation that I did is quite different from what I'm known for. I mean, I would
Sure.
do toxic torts, or we would do consumer fraud cases, large consumer fraud cases. I don't really talk too much about that online. Most people just
Sure.
all they know about me for is the trading card stuff, but I've actually done real litigation too.
Well, that's the thing, and I want to say so. It's funny because I remember in law school, we would have speakers come in and talk about this really interesting niche legal career they got into. I remember one time I forget what team it was, but it was a guy that was an attorney for one of the NBA teams came in. He said, my office is in the stadium. I watch the games and, I know all the players. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Like
That's
whether it's
pretty cool.
NBA,
Yeah.
NFL, MLB, we had all these people come in that are, 10, 20 years into their career. And they all said the same thing. We're like, how do I, get my diploma, pass the bar and go do what you do? And they're like, you have to basically pay your dues.
Yeah.
5, 10, even more years of grinding away, learning the litigation skills. And then, there's an old saying, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And it sounds like you had
Right.
this great opportunity. And, you can't just get into baseball card litigation without knowing how to litigate, how to take a deposition, how to do those sort of things. So
No, and
really,
that's exactly it. I've had recently, I've had a couple law students reach out to me and say, how do I do your career path? I'm like, well, join a big defense firm, really build 2,400 hours a year, doing every thankless task that nobody wants to do. Find a way to sneak yourself into the courtroom and spend as much time getting beat up in the courtroom by senior attorneys, and I mean, that's
exactly.
really it. And then after 24 years of practice, then you can focus on this.
Yeah, and sometimes cases just find your way. And it sounds, but I loved hearing how you sort of saw an opportunity, you saw a niche, and how it aligned with what you enjoyed, and you went after it. So that's really cool.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
and it really it's luck and opportunities, a lot of it too, because the trading card industry in 2010, 2011, when I started writing about it, it was big, but it's not as big as now. It's
sure,
we've had a lot of it's nice to be called an expert in an area, but sometimes it's a niche market where there's not much there.
sure.
However, with all the money that has been flooding into this area recently, I just I got lucky.
That's great. That's great. Um, I was going to ask you a couple questions here. So, first of all, I wanted to get this out of the way. I read somewhere you were a Doc Gooden fan. Is that correct?
It really was, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so in 1986, when I started
Yeah.
collecting, Dwight Gooden was the guy that was out there
Yeah.
that everybody was emulating. Everybody wanted to be like Dwight Gooden. So that was the focus really of my collection in '86, and I still got all my '86 tops Dwight Goodens that I
That's
have there.
awesome.
But unfortunately, it I did the wrong thing. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm investing in Dwight Gooden. I didn't invest in this other potential rookie that was coming up at the time called Michael Jordan,
Michael Jordan.
who, I
Exactly.
should have been buying some '86 Fleer at the same time, but I
Those
did
are worth a
not.
lot. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
funny you mentioned the basketball cards because I brought up Doc. I was at an antique store in Vegas a couple weeks ago, and they had junk packs wax for like a buck each. So I
Okay.
was like, oh, gotta buy a few. And I posted some videos on my Twitter of opening. So one of the cards I opened in the '89 tops was the Doc Gooden. I don't know if you can see it here. It's kind of blurry, but I found that for you. It's kind of there. It is.
Oh
There
yeah,
we
there we
go.
go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
No.
was like, oh, Doc Gooden here. I just opened one of those. But they had some skybox, like some little NBA skybox, and I put some videos, and people were like, wow, those are hard to find. And I
Mhm.
started looking up like even the '89, '90 Jordans raw, they're like 100 to a couple $100. Like, because it's funny. I don't want to steal your thunder, but you and I are probably the same generation, just like
Mhm.
Greg. I grew up in the '80s and '90s, and
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but my parents were like, they had had stories about how they had all these cards in the '50s. Parents threw them away. They grew up and they said, "I'd like to buy that Mickey Mantle card again." Oh, whoops, I can't.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they told us, save all those baseball cards. They're gonna be worth something, and they're worth nothing. So you can go to
Right.
the store and
No,
buy
it's
them for a buck or two. But apparently nobody thought to really save the skybox cards, the basketball cards. So some of those are from the '80s and '90s, the Jordans, yeah, especially the rookies, are actually worth a lot of money.
No, and it's really funny because back then, I'm trying to, and I'm probably going to mix up my licensors, licensees, and everything else. But
Oh gosh, here we go.
basketball was so unpopular that I don't remember if it was Topps or whatever. Just let their license expire with the NBA.
Really?
It
Wow.
was that nobody was collecting, and but that just goes to show you the power of Michael Jordan. I mean,
Yeah,
he's the one that focused the eyes of the world back on the NBA and created it, the focus that it was. And
absolutely.
he's my favorite player now. I went, finally last year I was able to get an '86 Jordan.
Oh,
It
that's
took a
awesome.
while, but I mean it's a neat little thing, and you never know like what cards are going to be good.
Sure.
And that's why you're probably like me. You've still got a bunch of cards that are probably worthless. Buckets of them.
Sure. Yeah, it's sentimental.
Yeah. Right.
But
Right.
but it's interesting. I'd like to hear your take on this, how the hobby has sort of come around. Because I was like you, I collected as a kid, probably started at '85, '86. I remember the '85 tops,
Yep.
that was a
Yeah.
great
Beautiful
set.
cards. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a kid, '85, '86. And then really 80, I've mentioned this in the pod before, like '89 tops was my favorite. I was in Little League. That's when I really, they'd give us tickets after the game to go buy a Coke or something, or you could get a pack of baseball cards for like a quarter.
Yep.
So I was like, oh, I always get the baseball cards. So I probably had the most of them. And I really got into collecting. And then by the early '90s, I was like '92, '93, I was already in middle school, high school, and, boy puts away his toys kind of thing. But I made a point like, okay, hold on to those. I'm going to want those someday. And I feel like that day for me and a lot of us came 2020 when we were stuck at home bored,
Yeah.
cleaning out cabinets. I was like, oh, my old baseball cards. So have
Yeah.
you seen? And I've heard that story from a lot of people. Have you seen an uptick in the hobby for that reason in the past 5 years?
There really has been. There really has
Yeah,
been, and it's led to some jokes because I truly dove back in about 2010, 2011.
sure.
So when 2020 came around, I went through all my cards, and I'm one of those annoying people that had a closet find that I didn't know I had a 2011 update of Mike Trout,
Oh,
two of them
cool.
actually. I didn't know
Yeah,
I had them. They were just sitting loose in the box. And
yeah.
so that was my find at that same time. But with all the influx in 2020 with all the people, and I'm not going to call myself an old head. There are people that have collected so much
Sure.
more, but you can always spot a 2020 collector versus the current collectors because we've all made the mistakes. I came in 2010, started trying to buy prospects. I have a spreadsheet of all the prospects because I'm
Oh,
like, I know
wow.
one of these guys is going to hit. None of them
Yeah,
hit.
yeah.
It's a complete waste of money. And so finally, and then there's like this evolution where you just start collecting what you like. And then
Gotcha.
at another point, you're like, you know what? I'm just going to start getting some vintage because it seems like vintage, will keep its way through. So this evolution of the collector. So it's really funny because when 2020 came, the market went crazy because everybody was buying prospects and basketball was the focus at the time. Everyone's
Right.
buying basketball cards and everything that's out there. And now you've had enough people have gotten burned by prospecting that you're seeing them. Well, I'm just going to collect what I like now. And then pretty
Exactly. Yeah.
soon, I figure in the next couple of years, you're going to have this big rush to vintage. So,
Yeah, and that's kind of where I always came from because it was vintage for me. And what was cool for me was seeing, and a lot of us, you grow up and you're like, oh, the 86 Conseco or the 84 Mattingly. Like I still have my 84 Mattingly from when I was a kid, and I was
yep,
like,
yep,
oh, this is I'm gonna retire on this sucker or whatever.
yep.
And
I
then
got that one too.
yeah, you go on eBay or if you pop into a store and you'll see like all these cards that you thought were holy grail cards in the 80s and 90s for sale for like $3
Yep,
raw. I'm like, oh, it was a
yep.
Kirby Puckett rookie, Doc Gooden rookie for like $4. And it's like, I got $4. I'm gonna buy that, or, and then so for sentimental reasons, and so you're like, that's kind of cool. Like,
Yeah.
and I did on my post. It's funny though. I wanted to get into this with you as see your perspective because two attorneys here. When I was doing my little videos opening these old packs I got for a buck or two, I made a point of saying if you go on eBay, like you will find a lot like this Doc Good. Like you probably buy this for like 50 cents or $1, something like
Mm,
that. But every once in a while, you'll go on eBay and you'll see, like a junk wax card, sometimes ungraded, sometimes a PSA 10, which, okay, fine. I would get this graded PSA 10. What is it worth? $10? I don't know. Like, you
yeah.
got to cover the cost of getting it graded and you get to
Right.
charge more. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But sometimes you see them and it's like five, $10,000. I had a friend recently who was like, hey, I saw some of my old cards when I was a kid and went on eBay, they're worth a ton. And here's what I told him, and this is what I said in my video. If I'm curious your perspective, if you see like a junk wax card for sale at some ridiculous amount, that doesn't mean your 89 Doc Gooden is worth
Yeah.
$10,000. To me, that shows one of two things. One, someone's hoping to just lure a sucker, who goes on to buy something and says, oh, that's what they're worth nowadays. I'm a stockbroker, I'll buy it. Or
Mhm.
I've also heard that it's big for money laundering. Are you familiar with this?
There, I have no proof of the money laundering thing, but
Okay.
some of it makes sense,
Yeah.
especially with like the NFTs, things that were there. It's just there is a lot of room for shenanigans
Yeah.
that's out there, and it is a way to overpay on paper for something to wash your money. There is that. So if anybody is a big Ozark fan, just
Yeah.
make that trading cards. And yeah, he went through a lot of pain and a lot of hassle, and he could have just used eBay and trading cards
Yeah,
for the same
a
thing.
bunch of junk wax cards. Well, that's funny you mentioned NFTs because I'm part of the entertainment and sports law section here in Vegas, and we put on CLEs, and we've had CLEs about NFTs, and I'm like, I consider myself a relatively intelligent person, like went to school and I read the news, whatever. I'm like, I don't know what in like people have explained it to me, and I don't understand it. And one of my friends was like, Russell, it's money laundering. And I was like, nobody has said that makes 100% sense. I get it now. So I've heard, I suspect, let me say this. I suspect that's something that goes on in the hobby when I go on eBay. So folks, if you're listening, your Dwight Gooden card is not worth $10,000. And please, if you're a stockbroker somewhere that wants to relive your childhood, please don't spend $10,000 on a Doc Gooden card. So,
No, no, no. But
uh,
yeah, but it's funny with the NFTs because that really started in 2020 also. Right
yeah,
around there, that's when you had a lot of NFTs. And again, us being, basically the same age for collecting,
sure.
I think we're used to just the physical feel of your trading card. I mean, there is something, and that's why I still have like trading cards just like in my office or on the walls, because there's just something about seeing it. So I never understood the concept of, just on a screen.
Yeah,
I've never really understood that,
it's
and it's
intangible.
so
Yeah,
easy. And I joke around that and we'll probably talk about it, but the whole right-click copy culture that's out
sure.
there, where you have people seeing stuff on the internet, they copy it, they think it's theirs, and they sell it or do whatever they're doing with it. But along those lines, there were a couple of NFTs that I thought the imagery was really cool. I really liked them, so
Sure.
I right-click copied, and I now have them as screensavers on my phone. Here are these like, $2 million NFTs that are out there, and and everyone's like, oh, but it has to do with, we got the code here to prove that this one's original. I'm like, that's great. I can't see your code. I
Yeah,
have
I
the
don't care if it's
exact same
original. Yeah,
thing here.
yeah,
So I don't
yeah. And it
understand
makes sense to me. The money laundering angle made so much more sense.
it. Yeah.
I wanted to get into sort of the nitty gritty here, and I want to go back to what you were mentioning about the 75 tops.
Mhm.
Look at the series. This is a great series. This was Robin Yount and George Brett's rookie card series.
Yeah.
Um, so
Vita Blue.
yeah, yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
Definitely the 70s with the colors, they pop, man. So I guess I didn't know. It makes sense now, but can you copyright or trademark a baseball card design?
So then that's really one of the issues that I want to see tested in the industry, because that's what the whole focus of that lawsuit was.
Okay,
Top said that you are, and then they expanded it and they involved, I think it was maybe in the 85 tops design too. But they said that, you are copying our design. Upper Deck threw a huge whole amount of defenses at it too. But like 99% of all lawsuits out there, it's settled, and it's settled confidentially. Now,
okay,
since then, Upper Deck has not made a card with a 75 tops design on it. So you can, reading between the lines who won, you'd have to
sure,
say
sure,
Topps
yeah,
saw their product, they defended their IP, and there's no longer that infringement of their IP out there. So reading between the lines, you can see that. But I really wanted to have the court, kind of give us that demarcation of where is the line, because 75 tops, that is a unique set. You
sure,
see that, you recognize that. But where is the line? I would argue that 75 tops should be copyright protectable. Like 86 Fleer, that's another one that's just an iconic set that I think should be protected. But
sure,
at some point, you're peeling back to like some pretty boring cards, like 50, like the 52 tops design. It's a white box. Is
yeah.
that protectable? I mean, when I see it, I recognize what it is. So I think it could act as either trademark protection or copyright protection, something like that. But to date, no court has ever chimed in on it. I think the manufacturers try to avoid each other's IP like that, because they recognize, hey, if I'm going to carve out here to make this product, it hurts my intellectual property too. So, had Upper Deck won that lawsuit, had Upper Deck said that, won a ruling saying that 75 tops wasn't protectable, well, oops, a lot of our stuff is not protectable also. So I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit of a, detente there.
So I'm curious. So for years, were the companies not, registering their designs with as trademarks or copywriting them? Was it just sort of a gentleman's agreement, like, hey, this is our design and don't steal it? Like, how was it? How's it working?
That's what's crazy about it. So for copyright, so everyone has moved towards trademarks. There's a lot of trademark filings that are
Yeah.
happening right now. There's very few copyright filings nowadays. That wasn't the same in the 80s and the 90s. There was a lot of copyright filings, especially Upper Deck. Upper Deck filed copyrights on everything that they had. And then even before that, there's a lot of Topps copyrights on a lot of their cards. They filed it more on card sets
Okay.
than anything. They really don't have what I would call a frame copyright, where they file a copyright just on the frame of the card itself. Um, but lately, especially in the 2010s, 2020s, the amount of filings in the copyright area have been minimal. And actually, if you look at which companies filed copyright applications, it was almost immediately followed by a copyright lawsuit. And
Oh
so
wow.
they were only filing copyright lawsuits before they weren't doing any preemptive steps. It was totally oh, there's an infringer. Now we got to file this because you can't step into federal court for a copyright suit unless you have the registration in hand.
Yeah, it's
So,
I'm familiar with music copyright, and
mhm.
sometimes, especially in Nashville, it's a whole separate conversation. People steal songs, and so it's like, oh, that guy stole my song. Let me copyright it and make sure before I sue him.
Yeah,
Before we get too much into the weeds, two lawyers talking here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you mind just for our listeners sort of explain the difference between copyright and trademark because they're very
sure.
similar but very different, you know?
Yeah, and I'll even add patents to the mix too,
Yeah,
because I
please. Yeah,
always
thanks.
find that it works to get them all out there. So patents and copyrights are actually, they're founded in the Constitution. You have a carve out for intellectual property protection for basically inventions and the arts. That's
Mm,
really what it covers. Patents cover inventions. So if you create a cure for cancer, patentable. Used to be if you came up with a better business method, patentable. That's the area when you think of true innovation, that's probably the area of patents. Copyrights, on the other hand, cover the arts, books, songs, paintings, even a little bit of computer programs for the non-functional aspects. And that's kind of the difference that I like to keep in my head between them. Patents cover inventions that are functional. Copyrights cover works of art that are more aesthetic and not functional. So that's kind of the demarcation there. Trademarks are the odd thing. Trademarks actually cover words, slogans, or really anything that when you see, it calls to mind the creator of the product itself.
okay.
So when you turn on Netflix and you hear the wong, that's a trademark, even though it's a noise. It's because you hear that, you think Netflix. I would say, like, going back to 75 tops. If you see that design, you see that and you think tops.
Yeah.
If for people our age, when we used to watch when TV was over the antennas, and we'd hear the bong, bong, bong,
Yeah.
NBC, it calls to mind that. So a trademark is anything that calls to mind the producer or the creator of the product or the service. So that's kind of the demarcation there. And I'm just gonna go a little bit weed wise because I always have a slight
Sure.
rant about IP here.
Please.
Trademarks are only valid as long as you have a product out there that you're using it. If you stop making a product after a while, you abandon that trademark, and then it's back into the public domain. Copyrights, because of Disney and Hollywood, last for basically ever. Because they're now over 100 years for a copyright, and they keep continuing to get extended. It's been a little bit since they were last extended, but basically anything that's covered by copyright now or anything that's created now is going to be covered by copyright for the rest of our lives. You're not going to get to use that. Patents, however, after 20 years, the patents expire and the invention falls into the public domain for anybody to use. And that's kind of what the motivation is. The government gives you a monopoly on your invention or your work of art so that way you can make the money for furthering the sciences or furthering the arts. But the deal is it reverts back to the public at some point, and then everybody can copy it and everybody can do something about it. Patents really haven't changed that much since they were enabled. I mean, I think the initial patent was 16 years and now, or 15 years, and now it's up to 20 years. So it
Yeah.
hasn't changed much. Copyrights used to be the same as patents, about 15 years, and now it's over 100 years. So, and I don't think that's correct, because if you think about it this way, if I come up with a cure for cancer today and I file a patent application on it, after 20 years, that patent will expire and everybody in the world can use my invention.
Yeah.
However, if I come up with Happy Birthday Part 2 and I get that, that's protected for over 100 years. So we kind of live in a society that values Happy Birthday Part 2 over the cure for cancer.
It
And I'm not, ranting on this to say that patents should be extended. I think copyrights should really be dialed back.
it's funny you say that because that's a triggering phrase, happy birthday, for copyright attorneys, just for all
Yes.
of this. I'm not going to get down the rabbit hole of copyright, but I think didn't it recently? I think the copyright expired recently, if I recall.
It
Um,
should have.
but for
It really
years,
should. Yeah.
yeah, for years, if you, it's kind of interesting thing to our listeners, if you go back and watch movies, you'll notice at a birthday party, they almost never sing happy birthday. The reason being it's copyrighted and they had like a embargo on this song. Like, oh, you want to use happy birthday in a movie? It's going to cost this.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
God forbid you don't clear the rights and you use it in a movie and you didn't get clearance, they will come after you. So for years, what they did in entertainment law, they would sing for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow," uh,
Yeah.
which I believe was in the public domain because everyone's like, I'm not like we're on a shoestring budget with this artsy movie. We're not paying for
Yeah.
we don't have happy birthday money here. We know
Right. And Happy Birthday, it's
yeah,
such a dumb song. There's only 4 or 5 notes. That's
yeah,
all it is. It's a dumb, dumb song. And it
yeah,
held Hollywood captive, or for ransom for a long time. And it'd be
yeah,
like you'd have a news reporter every once in a while would accidentally sing happy birthday to like
exactly.
somebody else, and it would be the biggest news and they got sued and
It was a
everything
racket,
else.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, I believe, I don't get off on. I think there's documentaries about it. It was written by like a teacher or something, but and then the person that ended up getting the copyright was some descendant or something. Once they had it, it was their gravy train. So they were like,
Yep.
I don't want to work. I want to collect my royalty checks on the beach, and so it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a
No.
whole separate conversation. But
Yeah. Aren't you guys glad you're listening? This is what happens when attorneys get together. We will find these little like rabbit holes of legal conversation. So hopefully you guys
yeah,
are enjoying it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, speaking of rabbit holes and legal stuff, I want to get into some of your cases a little bit, to hear kind of what you've done. I was looking on your website, and I don't want to, if I put you on the spot on a current case, and if you need to play the lawyer line of, I'm not at liberty to discuss whatever, fine. I don't want to get in any trouble. Um, but I noticed again at the beginning you mentioned on your Twitter that you had settled a big case with Greg Kreindler, who we previously had on the show. So I don't know if you're at liberty to discuss that case or
Sure.
not, but I'm
No,
curious to hear what happened.
it's often disappointing for non-lawyers out there when the vast majority of cases settle and they settle
Exactly. Yeah.
confidentially. That's just how it works. And but depending on how you settle it, there's certain things you can say and there's certain things you can't.
Right.
But at Lesko Law, we represent athletes, we represent artists, we represent copyright holders and trademark holders that have items that are being copied or their intellectual properties being used without their permission. So luckily, we've got Greg Kreindler, who's an amazing person. He's an amazing painter, as one of our clients. Unfortunately for Greg, there's a lot of people out there that are copying his works and are making trading cards of them or making prints of them, and Greg is, a true painter. I mean, the vast majority of what he's
Right.
done is a painting, and that's it. It's not, he's not making prints of, I think he's got 2 prints out there, and that's really just about it. So
Yeah.
it's his value is in the exclusivity of it.
Exactly.
So when other people are right click copying, pictures of it and they're coming up with trading cards or prints of it, it lessens the value of his work. And then also it gets into quality control problems.
Exactly.
Because if you're making a copy of a copy off the internet and you're printing it off on a product, it's not going through layers of quality control to make sure this is actually good enough stuff.
Exactly.
So for the most part, until recently, a lot of people have, when it comes to infringement that's out there, has either ignored it or just gone to the whole just send a cease and desist letter and hope that happens. uh, with advances in technology and the background that I have in plaintiff's work, we're taking a more aggressive stance. If there's infringers that are out there, we're going to actually sue them. Contact them first, try and
Sure.
work something out. And if they don't take the products down and if they don't, come to a settlement with us, we will actually sue you. So that, comes back, long way of explaining. So when we're helping
Yeah.
Greg on our website, we've announced a couple settlements that we've had for Greg, and these were pre-lawsuit settlements. So we find infringers, track them down, contact them, and luckily, quite a few of the infringers have done the right thing and settled. And the reason is there's this misinformation out there, and a
Sure.
lot of the potential infringers out there are just not informed as to the state of law.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And And so that's what we're trying to do. We bring the lawsuits and then we announce the results of the lawsuits, just so people know, hey, Greg's stuff, don't copy it. That's off limits. And then
Right.
hopefully we can just, in the long term, get rid of infringement that's out there.
And to play the devil's advocate, you know, to someone that isn't an attorney, even as an attorney, it's a complicated field. You have to stay on top of things. And there's something such as, we were talking about public domain. Happy birthday going to the public domain, and it's like not a lot of people think about that. This song, old folk songs. It was kind of genius. A lot of the early rock and roll bands stuff are covering old folk and blues
Yep.
songs, and like songs on the public domain, so they didn't pay royalties. Now, some of the bands would give money to the people anyway, but as someone that's making these cards, they may not know that, and they
Yeah.
may have here a public domain, and Greg's paintings are like of old scenes, so. I'm not trying to take their side, but maybe they're like, well, it's an old painting. It's probably, public domain. Nope, no, that's a modern painting that
Yeah.
he has copyrighted. Well,
No, and that
I took I'm assuming he has them copyrighted.
no, he
Yeah,
does. Yeah, he definitely does. And that's one of those things that out there that we're trying to get through the educational process, because
yeah,
there's one layer of infringers that are out there that think everything on the internet is free.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is not. That's the warning to everybody out there. If you are right click copying something and you're selling a product of it, you probably need a license for it. Someone else created it. There's some other value in there, whether it's not just copyright, but it could be trademarks. It could be some right of publicity. There's a
yeah.
lot of things that are out there. But then there's that next level of, saying, oh, this is based off of a old photo that's out there that's, probably in the public domain. Well, then what you're missing at that point is what's copyrighted is that next generation of, hey, what fell into the public domain is there for other people to improve. And that's what Greg does a phenomenal job too. He'll take a black and white low quality photo of some really neat players and some things, really neat events, but then he adds life to it.
Sure,
He
yeah.
brings he's just awesome with light and colors, the way that he'll
We talked.
reflect light of, he'll reflect the bouncing of light off the sand onto the uniforms and all this amazing
Mhm.
stuff, or the lights that are the way that they kick in and light people. He adds so much to it. And he's able to do that for one of two reasons. Either the photo's in the public domain, or he went out and got a license to the photo itself too, so that he could do his things with it also.
I'm
So when you do things correctly, it's one of those things that, kind of, makes me mad, is that when he does things correctly and then somebody else copies it. And, not only do they potentially, are they running an inferior product that's out there, but they may make it bad for Greg and other artists that are out there, because there's all this infringement that's out there, when the person that licensed it, if it's something that needed to be licensed, only
Yeah.
wanted Greg to make a painting of it. And now it's all over the internet with all these other things. And so you may have some great works that are out there that won't be able to be created, because now the licensor is going to be like, okay, that's it. No more. No more of this.
Yeah. You raised something I was going to ask, is to play the devil's advocate. I just assumed that most of the pictures, Greg, because he told me like a lot of the paintings he's doing are based on pictures. And I'm assuming that those are in the public domain. So it sounds like he has done his homework. Maybe he has a good
Yeah.
lawyer advising
Yeah.
him.
No.
And if they're not in the public domain, so he's getting licensed to use those, because that would be infringement. If I took a photo today of, Shohei Ohtani or something like that, and it's copyrighted and whatever, and then Greg didn't get my permission, he painted that painting, I would have a claim, say, hey,
Yeah.
that's my photo,
Yeah.
and that's sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, and it goes even one more step too, because we've been focused on copyrights, but there's also this thing called the right of publicity,
Yeah.
which is where athletes, entertainers, actors, everybody out there, they have there's a certain value to their image. So
Sure.
sometimes there might be a, piece of work that's in the public domain, or you can get a license to, but then you also have to get a license from the athlete themselves or the athlete's family, depending on if the athlete passed away, to actually use their image and make money off of their image too.
Yeah.
So there's like there's sometimes there's multiple layers. So you see a beautiful painting, there may be three licenses behind that beautiful painting, and then because then you may have to get the teams too. Those
Yeah.
trademarks, that logoed uniforms that they have there, you might have to get permission from those guys also
Sure.
too.
And that's something I want to talk about. We talked about this when we were messaging each other on Twitter, sort of bring it back full circle to Twitter X. Here's an issue that I think our listeners will find very pertinent, because I'm on Twitter X a lot, talking about baseball. I see you're on there. And if you're on, baseball Twitter, it's a fun place. But we talked about this. If you're, I'm always on there posting stuff like, oh, this player had this many home runs, and I'm not the only. There's thousands of people on there,
Yeah.
tweeting appreciations for this player, that player, putting stats, and there's usually a picture. And I do it. I don't, I go online. I'm like, oh, Freddie Freeman or whatever. Oh, here's a cool picture. I'll put on my post. Are there legal implications for doing that? Because we talked about this. I don't have a paid a premium account. I don't make any money off Twitter, but a lot of people do, and more power to you if you're making money. So should people be weary if you're on if you're a for a profit, Twitter account and you're using someone else's picture? Is that a concern? Like, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the laws of copyright really apply. It doesn't matter if you make money or not. It's if you copy somebody else's work and reproduce it.
Yeah,
That's really where it is. So there seems to be at least right now kind of a we'll let you do that kind
yeah,
of, if you're using it for a meme, if you're doing that. It's not a legal defense, but it seems to be that people are, wink wink nod nod, we know what you're doing, we'll let you do that.
sure.
And yes, it's technically infringement, but I would be careful about what you use, because there
Yeah,
are some quintessential shots that are out there. Like if think about some things that I've posted are the Shohei 50-50 Otani ball.
yeah, yeah,
There's a lawsuit over that. Two lawsuits that actually got combined into one, because whoever, the guy who caught the ball, there was a scrum for it, and two other people said that they actually had it, or they should have actually had possession of it. One thing that's really important there is the videos. There's multiple videos of what's
yeah,
going on in the scene. So, when you're posting stuff like that, there's always an exception to copyright for fair use for newsworthy events. When you're posting something and it's kind of a newsworthy event, you've probably got an exception there for it. But if you're just taking pictures out there and posting them, while you'll probably get away with it, probably people will ignore you with it, you might be infringing somebody's copyright for that.
yeah. You got to be careful too, and part of it too is common courtesy because I kind of discovered Greg on Twitter because I saw a lot of accounts I following were sharing his pictures, which he's very cleverly. I mentioned on his website, like if you try to right click copy, like it'll say it has a little like I forget what it says. It's something kind of funny. It's like, no, you can't do that or something like that. But he'll
Right.
put them on his Twitter, and then if he has a painting on his Twitter, you can usually download it from there. So I see people sharing his stuff, and look, the common courtesy thing is to say painting by and at tag him, and I'm sure he probably doesn't mind that. But if a newspaper or a commercial, product were to do it, that's different because if you're on Twitter, you see sometimes. Fans will be at the game and they'll take pictures. And then, News 3 Las Vegas or something will say, "Hey, do I have your permission to share that?"
Right.
Because they're going to use it for commercial purposes, so they have to get that permission.
Yeah.
Um, so
No, and that's because the way that copyright works, as soon as you create the actual work itself, you have copyright protection
yeah,
for that. Now, you cannot bring a lawsuit until you actually have a registration for
sure.
that work from the Copyright Office. But that's why they're being extra careful, because they don't want to run somebody's picture on there and then somebody gets a copyright and comes back and sues them on that later.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fun world. It requires a lot of permissions. And if an artist posts and work, typically they'll put watermarks on there or something to protect
Yeah.
it. And it's okay on Twitter if you post something for somebody to forward it, like it, do something else like that. But right click copying, printing it out, and selling it, you've got a couple steps too far at that point.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Um, I want a couple. You have a couple things on your website here talking about current investigations. I didn't even know. I guess when there's money, there's scams, there's
Yeah.
rackets. Um, you have one here about non-authentic game-worn uniforms. Is that a thing? Like people is that teams or just a guy on the team trying to make money or something? Like what's
Yeah, and
going on
so
here?
it covers everything, because I mean, if you go on eBay, right now, it's so I was really I was a trading card collector through and through.
Sure.
And then when U of I, University of Illinois, made its NCAA run, and ended up playing North Carolina and losing the finals. Because they cheated, but but at that time I wanted to get, if possible, a jersey signed by that team, something
Sure.
like that. And so I went on Twitter I went on eBay at that time and I looked, and there were like 33 people selling Illini jerseys with the whole team that had autographed it. And the autographs looked remarkably similar with each
Oh,
one of them that
wow.
was there. So it made me realize that there is a lot of fake memorabilia that's out there. And then even the FBI, they had Operation Bullpen and Operation Dugout. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this,
No,
but
no, no, it's fascinating.
yeah, their conclusion was that up to 90% of the memorabilia that's out there is fake.
Wow.
When it comes to instances like that, depending on who came up with the forgery or who did that, there's a potential fraud case there or a breach of contract case. And some of the memorabilia is fairly expensive that's out there. People spend a lot of money on these cards, only or cards or items that are out there, only to find out that maybe they're fake. And so I wanted to get it out there to collectors that, if you do have an item that is fake, that is fraudulent, that you were duped, there is potentially recourse that you might have. And
Yeah.
it's you'd be shocked how there's quite a few lawsuits that are out there about cases like this too.
Well, it's interesting. So, like for baseball cards, there's a lot of grading companies. PSA is kind of the most popular.
Mhm.
There's a few other ones. And you go on their website, and it's got a whole process. I'm sure there's probably fake baseball cards, but for the most part, it's probably one determine whether it's real or not, and then grade it. If you have autographs, that's a great. Like if you have a game worn uniform or you have an autograph, and you're concerned, who do you reach out to determine the authenticity? Is it
So
PSA
there
or
are,
other?
yeah, there are companies that do that. So there are autograph authentication companies, and there's even companies that will authenticate memorabilia
Okay.
that's out there. And the memorabilia sometimes is more difficult. Recently, there's been great improvements with the quality of televisions. So you actually have fields for what's called photo matching, where you'll have experts that are now able to look at like every game that was ever played, and they can, so if somebody buy, hey, I got this 2020 LeBron James jersey, so I want somebody to authenticate it. There are actual people who are who are experts in photo matching, where they will go to that game, they will look at the uniform, and they'll prepare a
Wow.
report for you looking at, because and it's really funny because sometimes it's just the mesh pattern. Every uniform is going to have a unique mesh pattern. So depending on where the name or the number lines up with the mesh, they can pretty much confidently confirm that this is the uniform that was actually worn there. So it's a neat field. I hope
Yeah.
they do a lot more with the advances there. But unfortunately, there's a lot of tricksters that are out there, and there are multiple cases ongoing right now where there are people who selling fake autographs or selling fake memorabilia, and there's even some that were they would actually use the grading and authentication company. They'd have fake logos from them to go with these, and
Insane.
like Beckett's involved in a lawsuit right there where they allege there was a some people in Texas that were selling, tens of thousands of dollars worth of memorabilia, saying that it was, authenticated by Beckett. And there's actually a lawsuit ongoing about that right now.
That's insane, but it makes, it's big money. And that's why, last year during the 50-50 season, I was watching some games with my wife and I was pointing out to her, you know, I guess they call it mansplaining now or whatever, I'm just talking, no, it's like talk baseball.
Yeah,
Sometimes she listens, sometimes she doesn't. But I was like, see what they're doing there before Shohei bats is, they're getting new balls for that
yeah,
reason because they mark them and everything like that. And then when they go out to check to see when Shohei hits his home run, they scan it. I guess there's a scanner or something on there, which is cool. I'm glad they do that because you see in the museums and stuff. Oh, here's Mickey Mantle's home run ball or something, and you're like, I'm just taking them on their word. And maybe it wasn't as big a deal back then, but
yeah,
um, the thing is, I've heard somewhere. I'm curious what your opinion is. I've heard somewhere that there's probably a lot of fake Babe Ruth balls out there
yeah,
because the story on Babe Ruth, everyone knows very famously loved orphans and kids, and he would sign a ball for everyone to ask, and they said like, it's funny the plot of the Sandlot's not necessarily accurate because a signed Babe Ruth ball, yeah, it's worth something, but there's a lot of them out there,
yeah.
and for that reason, there's a lot of potential forgeries, and now it's you know, I don't know if you have any experience or your background with fake autographs or fake Babe Ruth autographs, but that's what I've heard. That,
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fake autographs
yeah.
that are out there too. And one of my favorite statutes that's out there is a California statute
Okay.
that protects from fake autographs, from people
Really?
selling fake autographs. It is going to blow your mind. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it allows, if you purchase a item with a fake autograph, or if the statute, if there's something wrong with the certificate of authenticity for the item that it says it's authentic and it's not, and you bring a lawsuit under it, you're entitled to damages, attorney's fees and costs, but there's also a 10x multiplier
No
for
way.
damages.
No way.
So it's a not very often utilized deterrent that's out there, and that's one of the things that we've been looking at too. Because there's a lot of fake autographs, as you can imagine, out there, not just from like people faking autographs, stuff like that, but from actual celebrities doing things now. One thing we're
Wow.
looking at, it's another thing on my webpage, is auto pen cases where
Yeah.
you'll have like there's an athlete or there's a performer who says that they're selling autographs of
Okay.
what they've done, when really it's not. It's what's called an auto pen, where you actually just pile up all the papers, you put it in this like thing, and this thing signs it all for you.
Yeah.
And those aren't autographs. Those are definitively are not autographs. They're not what you're paying for. If somebody says, "Hey, I'm offering auto pens of this,"
Yeah.
that's fine. But when you're buying something and you think it's an actual autograph, only to find out later it's an auto pen, those are instances where, again, potential fraud action, definitely a breach of contract action. But then there's also, again, this beautiful little California statute that allows you to get up to 10 times damages and your attorney's fees back for it.
That's incredible. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's wow. Um, wow. Well, another thing you have on your website I want to talk about is graded cards that were later revealed to be altered or not authentic. Again, another baseball conversation I was having with my wife recently. We were talking about baseball cards and how it's blown up, and the T206 Wagner came up, the famous Gretzky Wagner, which my understanding wasn't there a lawsuit didn't that guy like cut the corners or something on
Yeah.
that?
So
Yeah,
Bill Mastro
yeah,
trimmed the card.
yeah,
And so for collectors that are out there, when you have a card that's authenticated,
yeah,
they authenticate it in one of two ways. One way is they'll deem the card as authentic and has not been modified. And if they do that, then they'll give it a score between 1 and 10, saying basically how pretty it is,
yeah,
basically how it works. However, there's another side to it where if you have a graded card, but it's been modified somehow, trimmed or color's been added, or something has happened to it, they'll still authenticate the card saying it's an actual card. However, it's been modified. So
yeah,
that way, and in the mind of collectors, a lot of collectors are purists. They don't want it cleaned up. They don't want it trimmed to make it pretty corners or to make it line up better 50-50
yeah.
on either side. They want the card
Sure.
unmodified. So that Honus Wagner card was, I believe it was the first card ever graded by PSA,
Yeah.
and they assigned it a number value, saying that it's not only authentic but it's unmodified. And then the testimony later came out that it was actually trimmed for it. So in that instance, trading card companies have guarantees saying that if they grade a card that is has been modified, and we say it has not been modified, they will, if you relied on that in purchasing the card, they will, make you better.
Yeah.
Whatever that means, what it means, you can litigate that and figure that out. But that was one of those instances where that would have been a really fun lawsuit for somebody to
Oh, it would.
file, because hey, you have this potentially multi-million dollar card that you spent money on, multi-million dollar card you spent money on, that's actually worth less. It's still worth a lot, but it's worth less because it is now just gets an A as authentic rather than a number score. So yeah, so and that's like that happens a lot. There's
Yeah.
actually a lawsuit ongoing about that right now with one of the graders that's will do a better job of determining what is the law in this area also. So it's a neat area to be in.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost like the notoriety of that particular T206 of being altered almost makes it worth more. I'll just briefly if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably well aware of the T206 Honus Wagner, but
Yeah.
I like baseball neophytes listening to my podcast. So if you're unaware, The T206 Honus Wagner is the holy grail of baseball cards. I think it's what 1910, 11, or something like that.
1909 through 1911,
1909. Oh,
somewhere. Yeah.
even earlier. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there was a card company that put out these baseball cards in tobacco, and the story was that I think the official story was that Honus Wagner didn't approve of chewing tobacco. From what I've read, I think he wasn't happy with how much money he was getting,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something like that. So for whatever reason, told them, hey, pull the cards, and I've seen the numbers. I think between 50 and only like 50 or to 200 maybe exists. And I think there's maybe 50 accounted for. So, and you see, you Google T206 Honus Wagner, people will find them at flea markets, like crumpled up, and it's still worth like, six hundred
Yeah.
thousand
Yeah.
dollars or whatever. So there's
Yeah.
only a handful of them that are actually in like decent condition and been graded. And there was one in particular, I called it the Wayne Gretzky card earlier because like I said, the first card to be graded, and it had this notoriety. I remember back in the 80s and stuff like that. And Wayne Gretzky, the famous hockey player, bought it as an investment and sold, and it's been bought and sold. It's almost like one of those movies. It wasn't just a movie about like the mandolin, or it was like cursed, and it goes through all these generations of people, and like the
Yeah.
story. I was What's that movie? The mandolin, or the red mandolin, or something. It's like, it was built in 1700s, and then like the guy owned it and died, and then that follows all the owners up to the modern day. So that Honus Wagner card's kind of like, I don't think there's a curse around it, but it's
Yeah.
got this notoriety of like this guy sold to this guy, then Wayne Gretzky had it, and then the lawsuit, some guy actually cut it and sold it, and then he got caught, and it's like it's I think that almost adds more value. It's like, yeah, that's the one that everyone talks about.
Yeah, and
But
it's
yeah,
funny that you mentioned that, because that's like I mentioned earlier, when I got back into collecting, I made the mistake of prospecting, and then I
sure, yeah,
realized, collect what you like. And so what I started collecting at that point was cards involved in lawsuits, because that allows you to actually tell a story about it. So that's, one of those things where you're right. To me, that's the Wagner to get, even though it's
yeah.
trimmed and it might not be tough, because it was involved in a lawsuit.
Yeah, yeah, it's more notorious now because that's the one.
Yep.
It's weird, and that shows you sort of the weird valuing system of what's essentially a piece of paper. It's all, at the end of the day, it's like this is all just a piece of cardboard. It's not
Yep.
worth
Yep.
anything. No intrinsic
Yeah.
value whatsoever. Um, so it's weird. One of a few more things on your website. I don't want to keep you too long, but there's something about intellectual property infringement on eBay and Etsy. That's sort of like what you were talking about with Greg. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's really a lot of what we do for artists and athletes, is
yeah,
that there is I'm going to call it a industry of people that are out there that will make T-shirts with players' images on there, or will make trading cards, unlicensed trading cards with paintings from other people, or they're
sure.
using other people's intellectual property and making money off it. That is infringement. Even if you're taking something that's of value to somebody else, their intellectual property, and you're using it and you're not paying them a license, you're probably infringing something.
Yeah,
And that's what I was, hinting at beforehand, that, to date, very few people have actually gone to litigate against them,
yeah,
because it's hard. It's hard to do that. But that's where we're trying to change the field now, is to say, hey, there have been significant investments in technology. We can find out who these people are. We can actually bring lawsuits against them, because quite often what they'll do, oh, you send them a cease and desist letter. They're like, oh my gosh, they shut down their eBay account, and then
yeah.
they create another eBay account, and they just keep selling the same things over and over again. So it's our goal to actually find out where they are and actually cut it off.
Yeah, when I think of this, I think of like the bootleg. I don't know if they still do it, but when I was a kid, I felt like it was more prevalent. The bootleg T-shirts outside the stadium. I remember when I played the
That's
fifth.
prevalent.
I may
It's
or may not have
still
purchased
prevalent.
a few. When I was a kid, I was like, oh, cool. Dale Murphy T-shirt for
Right.
like $4, and it
No,
doesn't really look like Dale Murphy. Did this guy draw this at home? So,
it's
um,
funny you say that, because that was actually my first introduction to intellectual property. Was I went to the first Lollapalooza,
oh yeah,
and we parked our car and we're walking in, and there's some guy with his T-shirts out there, and he goes, "Hey, if you buy it here, it's $15. It's $30 in the
yeah,
stadium." We're like, "Okay, cool." So we bought it. We put it on. We walk in. We walk by one of the shirt vendors, and he starts saying, "Hey, security, grab those guys. They're wearing counterfeit jerseys." And you looked at ours and you looked at theirs. You're like, "Yeah, the colors were off."
yeah,
There were
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
images for that. but that was our introduction. That was my introduction to the protections of copyright and trademark
Yeah, like
at
Pearl
that
Jam
time.
is misspelled or whatever, you know. It's like, yeah.
Lollapalooza's got 9 L's.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Exactly. You got to be careful. It's funny because tying all back, when I was in law school, people would come and talk about their careers. We had an attorney come talk to us once. He was Dick Clark's attorney, and
Oh
he was
wow.
talking about copyright infringement. And this is why it's tough because, the bootleg T-shirt guy, you can sue him, but it's like, what kind of money? They're not insured. They don't
Yep.
have insurance policy covering loss, and he probably doesn't have any money. Um, Dick Clark's attorney was telling us this story that when VHS first came around, people had, VHS tapes, and there was some lady in LA that was having an estate sale, and apparently she had taped every American Bandstand episode, and that show
Yeah.
ran for like 40 years or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so, word got around like every single American Bandstand episode is recorded. She had done a good job of like cataloging everything, and like people that were in the industry and liked it were calling each other like, go here. So Dick Clark gets word about this and tells his attorney sue her. And he's like, Dick, now hang on. This is like a 88-year-old lady, like, and he's like, no, we gotta send a message. He's like, I don't think that's the message you want to send. So um is that something that do you have to take into account like if someone comes and they're being infringed, it's like um are there times to walk away? Are there times to sue? Like, talk about that a little bit if you
Yeah,
don't
there
mind.
really are, and you have to look at everything. So, like, a lot of a lot of if you look at the difference between like who we send cease and desists to,
Yeah,
and who we sue, the people we sue aren't just selling, hey, I have one work. The ones that you sue are the ones that have, you know, 9 cards of Greg's that they say buy 5 get 3 free. They're actually, it's truly a business that they're churning these things out.
sure, sure,
So those are the ones that you really want to sue and go after, because there is a little bit of a PR that goes along with this.
sure.
If you find an infringer, I think everybody in society will agree infringers are bad.
Yeah,
They'll do that. Now, if you have somebody who just doesn't know the law and they made a copy of something, and they wore, it's like, hey, I'm going to Comic Con. I'm going to dress up like this person here. I made this in my own basement and everything.
sure,
I
yeah,
wear it out. That's, depending on what you do, technically that could be trademark infringement or copyright infringement, but you're not going to sue that person, or you shouldn't
yeah,
sue that person because they're a fan and they're bringing it to you. Now, the person who's actually makes that costume and then sells 100 of them, well, now at that point, you're an infringer at that point and you're making money off of other people's IP. So there's definitely always a little bit of a reasoning process between it,
yeah,
and it's common sense. Don't sue the grandmas in the basement that are taping taping their
yeah.
favorite actors out there, but sue the people who made those copies and then sold 100 of them to everybody else.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Star Wars. If you're familiar with Star Wars intellectual property, well, Lucas doesn't own it anymore, but for
Yeah.
years, that was the thing that Lucas, he kind of took a Grateful Dead approach. I put them in the same camp of like being very loose in terms of what the fans can do with the logos,
Mhm.
with the characters, because he knew sort of like how the Dead let people tape because he's like that. They said that's how people get to know us, and it's free publicity. George Lucas was very loose with allowing fans to dress up like Star Wars characters. He not only was very loose about allowing fan videos and fan movies and fan fiction, but they had like fan video, film festivals and stuff, and Lucas would show up. So he was smart enough to know, hey, look, this isn't a company. This isn't, Paramount making Star Wars movies. This
Yeah.
is Paul and Russ dressing up like stormtroopers and making home
Yep.
videos, and it's
Yep.
funny. And it's like if you sue Paul and Russ for doing their little lightsaber battle, they're gonna be like, I don't like Star Wars anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a kind of a fine line of knowing who the right people to sue are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And but I'm sure if it came to Kenner and somebody was making knockoff Star Wars
Yeah,
figures,
yeah.
those people are going to get sued right there.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Well, Paul, I told you I'd only be an hour. We're going a little over, but I want to give you two kind of final things I want to ask you a little bit. For people that are listening now, because a lot of people, if you're listening to this podcast, thank you, and you're probably a big fan of baseball, and I have a lot of people that follow me on Twitter that are in the hobby and collecting cards and stuff like that. we've gone over some of the things on your website, and if it's repetitive, feel free to say the same thing. But I just wanted to see, got you here. This doesn't constitute legal advice, but it's sort of like having a lawyer here. What are some of the big key issues that people should be on the lookout for if you're into baseball cards, jerseys, things like that? Like, what should they be aware of? And if you had any words of wisdom to sort of guide the murky waters, what would they be?
Yeah, and right now is I think the biggest protection is just be smart.
Yeah,
There is a lot of fraud that's out there. If you see cards that are out there, if you see a deal that's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true
yeah,
out there. There's a big demarcation between raw cards and authenticated cards that are out there. At this point, I really don't deal too much with raw cards
sure,
because I mean, if newer modern, I doubt there's people knocking it off. But if it comes to like vintage or older cards,
sure.
I will only, especially like bigger ticket items. If I like my '86 Jordan that I bought, there are raw '86 Jordans out there, but that is the most copied card that's out there. That's the most probably infringements that are out there for any trading card that's there. So, given those risks that are out there, I made sure that I bought a card that had been authenticated by an expert that
Excellent.
was out there, and that's really the focus that I always have is that if you're going to make a larger investment. I mean, if you're buying a dollar card, just have fun with it. But if you're
Exactly.
going to,
Yeah.
spend hundreds of dollars or more on a card, dot your I's, cross your T's, buy something that has been authenticated, that is trustworthy. And hey, maybe you're an expert and maybe you know how the card feels and how it's supposed to look. Educate yourself so that you do know that. But there's a lot of fraud out there. Protect yourself. And if unfortunately later on you find that you have purchased something or were taken advantage of, don't just pout about it. If it's significant money, somebody can help you, whether it's me or most of the transactions that can go bad in the trading card world are breaches of contract or are
Yeah.
fraud actions. Most litigators or attorneys are familiar with that.
Yeah.
If you got ripped off to a lot of money, just talk to an attorney about it and, see if it's worth its time that you can actually pursue somebody for that.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed too is the hobby community, and there's the hashtag the hobby on Twitter. Where
Mhm.
it's kind of a self-regulating community because people, it's funny, you scroll through and people, if they've been duped on eBay or something like that, they go and then it kind of spreads like wildfire, and it's like, okay, don't buy from at cards from Omaha or whatever, guy's a
Right.
crook or a thief. So,
Or,
um,
or this item has already been previously shown to have been fraudulent and this it's for sale again over here. Be careful
yeah.
about it.
Yeah,
They,
and
they
there's websites for that. Even graded cards, like I said, there's companies, there's people that make fake graded cards,
yeah,
or people, or maybe in the early days of grading, some fraud slip through and stuff like that. So
yeah.
yeah, there's websites and everything for that. Last thing,
And
Paul. Oh,
and
sorry, go ahead.
or before we move on,
Yeah, yeah,
there
sure.
is this a recent trend that's been happening is we're seeing more libel, slander, business disparagement claims because sometimes when you're talking about high ticket items and somebody claims fraud, you're hurting that item's value. And there is at least one lawsuit that's going on out there that has to do with a LeBron James rookie patch auto card
Wow.
that was up for auction, and the card was on its way to being sold for a couple $1 million, if not more. However, there was an account called Card Porn that was out there that called the authenticity of the patch into question,
Okay.
which eventually led to the card being delisted from the auction, which then got a lawsuit where
Wow.
the consignor sued the auction house and sued Card Porn also for it too. And it's a lawsuit that's still going on. Whether the patch is authentic or not, there's issues with everything that's out there. But you can see when you have a card that's worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, posts online could hurt the value of those cards.
Sure.
And if they catch something that's fake, that's great. But if you don't have a basis for it and you hurt the value of the card, they could, if you hurt the value of that card, somebody could come after you. And so there's at least four of these types of lawsuits that are out there right now. So it's increasing, and you can understand why because of the internet. A lot of
Yeah,
people are keyboard warriors. They feel a little bit of
sure.
invincibility behind it. Well, now people are reaching through and protecting their, not just their IP, but their cards themselves or their memorabilia themselves if you're, posting incorrectly about it.
Sure. And I guess the lesson there would be think before you badmouth someone, have some proof. If you're unhappy with the transaction, I paid too much for shipping. I'm gonna trash Paul Lesko's card shop or whatever. And that's like, yeah, you may be slandering or libeling this person.
Yeah, yeah. Remember, truth is always an absolute defense
Sure, yeah.
to something like that. But if you're calling somebody a counterfeiter, have the evidence beforehand.
Yeah, and I stay out of it. I'm like, I'm Switzerland
Yeah.
in these debates, but you do see some threads sometimes on Twitter where it's like, okay, I need to talk about this company or this company.
Hmm.
I've noticed, and like they'll show pictures. I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Again,
Yeah.
self-regulating community. Um, Last thing, and I want to let you know is I'm not. I told you I'd be an hour. Try to be respectful of your time. I know you're busy. I just like talking to Greg and a lot of my other guests I've had. I could talk baseball all day, and I know you can, and we
Yep.
could be
Yep.
here 6 hours and get nothing done. I'm having a lot of fun, and I want to keep this short because I told you it'd be about an hour. But I always give my guests an opportunity at the end to plug themselves, what they're working on. I've had a couple of music. I've had Dan Byrne and Chuck Brodsky on, and I was asked to get new albums. You're doing a tour, um, um, so this is or your chance, if you will, to sort of plug. Anything you're working on, or if somebody is listening to this, people in the hobby, and they think they might need an attorney or something, this is your
Yeah.
chance.
No,
You want to
and
plug
that's
your
thank you
career.
for that. And
Yeah,
basically, my law firm, Lesko Law LLC, we focus on plaintiff's work with a particular focus on intellectual property, and especially when it comes to sports memorabilia or athletes' rights or artist rights. That's really where we focus. And if there are people having issues in this regard, feel free to reach out to me or contact me. I take a lot of phone calls. I talk to a lot of people. I mean, and as you can imagine, a lot of the calls and stuff are like, "Hey, I got this $200 card. I think it's a bad deal." I'm like, I'm not the guy to help you for it,
yeah,
but maybe you can do small claims court. And so I do enjoy. I mean, like we're having fun now. I do enjoy talking to collectors. So
sure, yeah,
people call me up. I even had somebody who called me up. A couple days ago, he had just gotten off work. He had a beer, and he goes, "I got the best idea ever." So he calls up and goes, "How do I patent this idea when it comes to trading cards?" And had to talk him down, off of it
yeah,
because other
yeah,
people came up with it. But if there's IP issues that people have, or if they think they've got fraudulent memorabilia or trading cards or something like that, there may be something you can do, and it may simply be just give me a call or reach out to another lawyer. And the answer may be, "Sorry, I can't help you, but." Have you heard of small claims court? It's
sure.
underutilized, and for this area, I think it's particularly powerful.
Yeah, and I'll second what Paul said. At the very beginning of my career for a year, I did plaintiff's work and personal injury work, and I'll echo what you said. Most of the people that walk through the door, you don't take their cases,
Yep.
but I would always try to find a way to help them. Otherwise, I guide them to small claims court. Again, if it was two
Yep.
hundred dollars, it's going to cost $10,000 in attorney's fees to litigate $200, but you can do it yourself. Here's the form. Try to help them in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, I guess
Yeah,
if
and then
anyone's
that's something a good take home too is
yeah,
that small claims court is very powerful for instances like this. And there's limits like $5,000 or 10,000
sure,
or $12,000. You can't bring claims stronger than that. Most times you can't have an attorney in small claims court,
yeah.
so it's it's a little bit brutal. But sometimes the answer is staring at you in the face. Small claims court.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Not to do too much time, but I've had a couple times insurance companies have hired me to represent people in small claims court for like little car accidents and stuff. And I had a judge say once, "Why are you here? Attorneys shouldn't be here." And I was like, My client hired me. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm here."
Yeah.
She's like, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" I'm like, "I was paid to be here." So,
Yeah, and it's the wild, wild west
it
because
is, it
I
is.
mean, there's a little bit of unpredictability in any court. I mean, I've
Yeah,
won cases I should have lost, and I've lost cases I should have won. Every
sure. Yeah,
lawyer that's happened. Small claims court, all bets are off.
yeah.
Anything
It's
could happen there. I don't even think they have to be bound by precedent.
Yeah, the
So,
fact the fact you're a lawyer means nothing. In fact, it's a disadvantage because, like I said, the judge was annoyed. Like, why are you here? So she
yeah,
already didn't like me.
yeah,
It's
yep,
very much just go say what happened, and then the judge is like, "Yeah, you're in the wrong," kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, for those of you guys listening, if you have issues, I tried to cover a lot of the issues. that Paul gets into on his website here. If you've got issues with non-authentic game uniforms, fake cards, altered cards, if you know, there's a lot of people listening probably into collecting, and if you've got some real money involved, and some of these cards are investments. So you're
Yeah.
buying Mickey Mantle rookies, Jackie Robinson rookies, the old Satchel Paige rookies. Man, I always want to get one of those. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
expensive, man. So if you've got one of those, you get a bonus at the end of the year, or you win the lottery, or you get a big case for some coming in some money. You say, I've always wanted this mantle, I'm gonna drop a few grand, more than a lot of money on it.
Right. Right.
And then you have an issue, don't take a six-figure bath on a card. Call Paul. His website is lescolawllc.com. You can go there and get more information about Paul. And I went, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably internet savvy. I'll go on YouTube. There's a bunch of interviews with Paul. This one will soon be up there.
Great.
And you can hear
Great.
what he has to say. So,
And also, I every day, I think a lawyer's favorite case is somebody else's case.
yeah,
So every day I start off before I start billing, I go and I see what's happened in the litigation landscape for trading
sure.
cards, and that's my morning coffee. Between like 7:30 and 9 o'clock before I really start working, I will post about what has happened in the trading card world in the courts, in sports memorabilia, in the courts, and I try to make it educational and I try to make it funny.
Yeah.
So if you need another follow on Twitter, where learn a little bit about the law, see a little bit about trading cards, and hopefully laugh every once in a while, I'm on Twitter at Paul_Lesko.
Great. Yeah, that's how I found you. Like I said, the algorithm just the force works sometimes to,
Sometimes I
bring
don't have a blue
sometimes.
check mark, so you really have to be on a lot for me to pop up. But
Yeah, yeah, I gotta give a hand to Twitter. I will say Instagram's another story. I make sure because I get targeted ads, and I'm like, I don't. What is this? I've never used this product. But
yeah,
Twitter seemed to work in this case.
good,
Paul, I want
good,
to thank you for your time. I'm gonna end the recording, and then we can chat real quick. But
perfect.
thank you so much.
No, thanks for us. I really enjoyed this. This is
Um,
fun.
Me too. Me too.